Thank you everybody for joining us today for our webinar, and I welcome you to Introductions to Green Shores. This event is hosted by Stewardship Centre for British Columbia and the town of Qualicum Beach. My name is Anna and I'm a communications coordinator with the Stewardship Centre for BC. Today I'll be your sort of technical support person and help you go through this webinar. So first of all, you notice that you've been muted and your cameras are off. We ask you to keep them off during the webinar just to prevent any feedback or background noise and technical difficulties. Now, if you have any questions, we encourage you to ask them using a chat box feature on Zoom. If you're new to Zoom, you can find chat box in the lower panel of controls on Zoom screen. If you just look below our presentation, below our slide, you will find an icon that says chat. You can click on that and the white window will pop up on the right-hand side of your screen. That's where you can type in your comments and questions. At the very end of this webinar, we will address all of your questions and your comments, okay? I will record this webinar and I'll share it on our Stewardship Centre for BC website as well as our social media. Now, without any further ado, I'd like to turn it to our presenters, DG and Grant, for introductions and our presentations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Anna, and welcome everybody on this beautiful day here on coastal British Columbia. So I commend you for joining us here for the webinar. So my name is DG Blair, and I'm Executive Director of the Stewardship Centre for BC. And as in this role, I provide leadership and project management for delivery of stewardship projects and resources to audiences throughout BC and have been involved in the development, delivery, and application of the Green Shores program since 2010. I provide overall technical expertise in project management for Green Shores in Canada, coast to coast to coast. I'm an instructor for Green Shores Level 1 and Level 2 training. I participate as a member of Natural Resource Canada's Coastal Management Working Group, and I manage the BC Green Shores Local Government Working Group. For those who are new to the Stewardship Centre, I just thought I'd just touch briefly on our mission. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to strengthen ecological stewardship in BC by providing educational, technical, and capacity programs and resources to organizations, governments, the private sector, and the general public. And we always work in collaborative partnership. Green Shores is a keystone program of the Stewardship Centre. So one of the things that would be great to do is to hear a little bit about you. So as Anna mentioned, we have the chat box function. And if you'd like to just type in your first name, where you're from, and any reason for participating, that would be really great to have that. So I'll just type into the chat box there. So before we get into sort of the nitty-gritty, I always like to show a little bit of inspiration. So this was a project that was rated during the development of Green Shores for Homes. And so this is the before. And then this is the after. And you can see how the hard armoring has been removed and the landscape has been naturalized with native plants. So what are we going to cover today? I'll be providing an introduction to Green Shores, including its principles. Then Grant will provide an introduction to himself and we'll cover coastal shorelines, sea level rise, and some options to address current situation. Then it will hand it back over to me and we'll talk about shoreline habitat, and I'll do an overview of Green Shores for Homes, cover the Green Shores for Homes incentives pilot project that we're just undertaking, and we'll finish up with some Q&A. And we'll be planning on about 1 hour for the total webinar. So just before we get too much farther, I'd like to touch on the evidence for utilizing nature and nature-based solutions. This is a report that just came out in earlier this month, and it really talks about the value of using nature-based approaches. And they note a number of different recent reports that coastal habitats can provide significant risk reduction to coastal communities. Field-based studies from around the world reveal that coastal habitats can reduce wave heights by 35 to 71%, came in 2016. And also that shorelines hardened with seawalls support 23 less biodiversity and 45% fewer organisms than natural shorelines. And all this really is evidence that suggests that both natural and nature-based approaches for hazard mitigation can be equally, if not better than conventional approaches. And they often are less expensive to install. So what is Green Shores? Well, Green Shores promotes project designs that dissipate wave energy, accommodate storm surge, and lessen flooding. It incentivizes habitat restoration and coastal ecology, maintenance or restoration of sediment transport processes, and the creation of natural areas. It offers a resilient approach to sea level rise and climate change adaptation. So we're looking at moving from photographs or situations like we see on the left-hand side of the screen with a hard armor approach, and moving to a nature-based approach, which is more resilient. And what's interesting about these two photographs is that they're taken in on the same day with same storm conditions, with the same general wave coming in and wind conditions. So you can see how the shoreline on the right is much more resilient. So Green Shores is validated. It's an approach that has a solid track record of endorsement and recognition. We're the recipients of a major grant from Natural Resources Canada to support Green Shores implementation, one of 8 projects from across the country. Green Shores is the winner of Best Environmental Idea to Address Sea Level Rise in a competition at Simon Fraser University in 2014. And finally, we are a finalist with the Real Estate Foundation Lands Awards in 2010. So what is Green Shores? Basically, Green Shores is a rigorous standard. It's based on these 4 guiding principles. The first is we want to preserve or restore shoreline physical processes. So this is to say any project that is Green Shores verified has to preserve or restore those shoreline physical processes. It also has to maintain or enhance habitat function and diversity. It must prevent or reduce pollutants from entering the aquatic environment. And finally, it must avoid or reduce cumulative impacts. So together, these guiding principles have been created or have been transitioned into 2 credit and rating systems. Similar to LEED or Built Green, it describes various credits and ratings for best practices based on those 4 guiding principles. The backbone of Green Shores in British Columbia, and indeed across Canada and in Washington State, are 2 credit and rating systems. One is called Green Shores for Shoreline Development, and the other is Green Shores for Homes. However, we found just having the 2 credit and rating systems on their own wasn't enough to see projects utilizing the design guidance that has been created. So we established the Green Shores for Local Government Working Group, of which the town of Qualicum Beach is a member. We also established partnerships with post-secondary institutions to deliver training. We have soon registration for approved professionals who have taken all the Green Shores training. And then finally, we have project certification for those projects that have chosen to enroll and get their project Green Shores verified through the Green Shores process. And I'll speak more about each of those in the coming slides. So I mentioned the backbone of Green Shores are these two credit and ratings guides. This guidance material has been developed to encourage properties to do work in a shore-friendly way. So the credit and ratings system, as well as we do undertake a number of research reports and resources. I did want to touch on also that we have education and training through post-secondary institutions, including BCIT and University of Victoria. And we're currently expanding our training offerings to the Maritimes in Canada through St. Mary's University in the fall of 2020 and soon University of PEI as well. Wanted to touch on that the Stewardship Centre is the coordinating organization. So we oversee Green Shores project enrollment. We assign verifiers, provide training for them, and we issue the project ratings and certificates. And as I mentioned, the Registrar of Approved Professionals is coming soon for those who have completed the full suite of Green Shores training. I'd like to just mention that for those who haven't had a chance to poke around on the website, there's a really great video that was produced as part of the BC Adapts series of videos by the province of British Columbia and with funding from Natural Resources Canada, and they were produced in 2016, a series on coastal flood management. So you can go to the BC Adapts YouTube channel, or you can also find this video on the SCBC website as well. It's about 9 minutes, and it's really, really well done. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that because we don't have time to watch it in this webinar. So right now I'd like to turn it over to Grant. So we are going to, I'm going to stop sharing, and then Grant is going to pull up his slides.
Helps if I unmute my microphone. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet there, Grant.
Oh, I have to click one more thing. Can you see the screen now?
Yes, looks good.
Yes.
All right. Well, thanks, DG. It's a pleasure to be speaking to everyone today. I'm going to talk, as DG said, about some aspects of the coastal engineering and coastal processes and shorelines. And I'll start at a fairly high level, and then I'm going to work down and focus in more closely on Qualicum Beach. Before I start, just really quickly, who I am. I'm originally from Victoria, grew up in Victoria on the island. Later, I did my undergrad at UVic, did a master's at UBC, and then after that, I went and worked at the National Research Council in Ottawa in their coastal hydraulics lab, which is really a fascinating place. Imagine wave tanks the size of hockey rinks with big wave machines at one end. So for an engineer who likes to work on coastal engineering projects, it was a fun place to be. All my family's out in BC. I came back to BC, worked for Sandwell for a number of years, later worked with SNC Lavalin, including in 2014, 2015 on the waterfront master plan for Qualicum Beach. In 2017, I joined Northwest Hydraulic Consultants. NHC, really enjoying being at NHC. Probably going to be with them, I think, for the rest of my working career. We're a small employee-owned Canadian company with a real scientific focus, lots of R&D studies going on within the company as well. So it's a good fit for my areas of interest. For those of you on the call who might not know, I mean, a coastal engineer is not one of the more common practices of engineering compared to, say, a mechanical engineer or a civil engineer. Coastal engineering is a fairly specialized subset of civil engineering, and it's really it's a civil engineer who's got a real focus on working in the intertidal zone. And to be a coastal engineer, you need a bit of a background in meteorology, a little bit of a background in geomorphology, and as well as a background in structures and forces and everything else. So I find it a very interesting and fascinating field. The quick answer, though, that my daughter tells her friends is her dad designs beaches. So quickly, sea level rise, what it is. Yes, it's happening. You know, that question sometimes comes up. The global data is if you average out the entire global record, we're averaging about 3 millimeters a year. And have been since about, if you average back to 1995. What's driving it is really increases in greenhouse gas emissions. The parts per million of carbon dioxide concentration is now above 400 and continues to climb, which is leading to increasing temperatures. And the increased temperatures are reflecting themselves in two ways. One is thermal expansion of the ocean. Just as the water heats up, it expands a little bit, and that's accounting for some of the sea level rise. And then there's also ice melt. So, as a coastal engineer, I'm not a climate change scientist, but as an engineer, we have to stay abreast of what the science is telling us and incorporate that into our guidance. Here in relative to Canada, some of the studies recently that are worth noting is the Natural Resources Canada did a big Canadian climate change report that was issued in 2019. You can see some of the bands of uncertainty around future sea level rise, and there's a wide range of uncertainty around it. There's not uncertainty that it's going to happen, but the uncertainty is more of how much is it going to be. And everything from half a meter up to 1 meter sea level rise seems to be the range of the expectation for amount of sea level rise by year 2100 or 80 years from now. But there's some outliers there that are worth noting if there's positive feedback loops in the Arctic, rapid ice melt and stuff, that some of the science is saying that we could get greater rates of sea level rise. Here in British Columbia, the provincial government has mandated that for planning and design guidance that municipalities consider 1 meter of sea level rise for year 2100. So that's generally what's being done. It simplifies things in one way. We just pick that 1 meter and go with it. But that's 1 meter of sea level rise. It varies around the coast because in some areas the land is rising and in some areas the land is falling. So that gets factored in. There are guidelines for engineers and for dike design and everything in the province. I won't really touch on that, but just to say that there is some legislation around this and guidance for professional practice for engineers that we have to follow. And this is a good graphic, I think, that kind of shows that what goes into a shoreline design in terms of coming up with water levels and things. It starts with an analysis of combinations of tides and storm surges to come up with a design flood level, and that would be the level of the ocean if you don't have any waves in it. On top of that, you can add wave effects. The shoreline at Qualicum Beach is exposed to some pretty large waves in the Strait of Georgia, and so those get added on the wave runup. I'll talk about that a bit more. And then for a flood construction level, if you're developing a house, getting a building permit, the home should be above the FCL. And there's a freeboard which goes above that. So those are the components that go into shoreline design if you're an engineer. So wave run-up is a term that coastal engineers use. It's the height that waves will run up on a slope, whether that's a gentle beach or whether that's a seawall. The picture on the right here is showing waves hitting seawalls in West Vancouver. That was storm in December of 2018. It's a neat picture, I think, though, because you can see the waves hitting the seawalls are the water's getting thrown vertically quite high, so the wave run up is quite high. Where the photograph is taken, though, is more of a park setting, and there's more of a gentle beach and some vegetation, and the wave run up is much lower. So wave overtopping is another term that is used by coastal engineers, and it really talks about if your shoreline isn't very high, how much water is coming over the edge of the shoreline. It's a term used for dike design. If you've got a coastal dike, like in the Netherlands or in Richmond, here in BC, if the dike's too low and waves are coming over the top of it, the engineers start to become interested in what's the rate at which water is coming over the edge of it. The picture on the bottom left is of Osler Park in Campbell River. It's after a storm occurred, and you can see logs and debris. During the storm, the waves were completely coming over the top of the rock armor and starting to flood the park there. And the picture on the right shows the West Vancouver seawalk during a combination of a high tide and a winter storm. So the effect of sea level rise on wave run-up and overtopping is such that a small amount of sea level rise can actually have a really big effect on the rate of overtopping. And just as an example, I included this. This was some work we did in Campbell River. On the top, that was with present day conditions for a design storm, similar to that picture you just saw. And the average amount of overtopping for Osler Park was about 14 liters per second per a given meter of shoreline. So someone like to say that's what is it, about 16, 18 bottles of wine coming over every second on average. With 1 meter sea level rise, that jumps up to an average of about 130 liters per second. And that change in average overtopping from 14 liters per second to 130 will completely change. It'll flood Osler Park, it'll cause significant damage. So it's beyond the threshold of what the present shoreline will be able to tolerate without experiencing a lot of damage and flooding. Whereas today it's sort of more nuisance flooding and relatively easy to clean up. So that was a very, very quick and brief background to some coastal engineering terms. Shoreline protection can be considered on sort of two scales. One would be a site-based, which is, if you can think of that as an individual property. And on another scale is more what we call a reach-based. And by a reach, we mean like a section of beach, a reach of the beach. It's a bit of an old nautical term. And on a site-based approach, you can think about raising houses or flood-proofing, doing shoreline protection structures like seawalls or revetments. On a reach-based approach, you can start thinking about similar means of protection, but you can also start to incorporate larger offshore structures and other type considerations. I'll give some examples here. Some of these graphics were developed jointly between NHC and Lanark. D.G. Blair mentioned David Reed. His team helped produce some of these great graphics. So, I mean, a very classical form of shoreline protection are seawalls. They can be very effective, but one of the downsides against them is they will alter the shorelines in a significant way. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Another means is rock armoring. I think it's pretty common. You see this a lot in Qualicum Beach, a revetment slope. Beach nourishments can be very effective, but the engineer has to be very careful about where you plant a beach nourishment. If you have a lot of longshore transport potential, putting a beach nourishment in, you'll spend a bunch of money to put sand down and then just see it washed away. So Pocket beach headlands. This is an idea that kind of mimics what we see in nature. If you sea kayak up and down, or just boat or walk up and down the BC shorelines, there's many examples around Vancouver Island and the Gulf Islands of little pocket beaches where you've got rocky outcrops on either side and then a nice sandy, well, sand and gravel here in the northwest, beach in between them. Similar idea, trying to replicate that you put some engineering rock armor structures out that break up the longshore transport and maintain those finer sediments. Ideas exist around living shorelines where if the wave energy is too high, a structure is built some distance offshore, which helps to break up the wave energy and allow for various options. Two are shown in these graphics, but different options that you can consider. But the first thing you have to deal with is dissipating that heavy wave energy that's coming from offshore to then allow different shoreline habitats to start to be developed. So that was a very, again, quick range of very high level ideas of what can be done within engineering practices and tools and things that people think about. Part of the master plan study that S.C. Lavalin did, they looked at the history of Qualicum Beach, and I find these old photos quite fascinating. You can see the very large trees that used to come down right to the shoreline, the wide natural beaches. Picture showing looking up towards the little Qualicum River estuary, and you can see trees and a wide natural shoreline. And in a large way, the beach is not changed a lot. And something I find striking is that even as early as the 1930s, people wanted to build their homes or their summer cottages as close to the edge of the water as they could. So I'm going to zoom in a little bit and talk about what's happening in Qualicum Beach area. There's a windrose shown right up at the top, shows sort of the predominant wind directions. That's from Sisters Islet, and it really shows that the strongest winds in the Strait of Georgia are really aligned with the length of the Strait of Georgia. What this means is those blue arrows is you get storms from two directions in Qualicum Beach. You get storms from the southeast in the Strait of Georgia, which manifest as easterly type waves coming in along the shoreline. And you also get northerly storm events that occur. And the net result of that, well, I should say the yellow arrows on this graphic show sediment supply, sources of sediment being fed onto the beach. And the orange arrows kind of show that sediment, longshore sediment transport happens in both directions along the shorelines because of the nature of the storms that come in. In the area near Higson Crescent, there's a bit of a net flux where the sediments are moving from the northwest towards the southeast overall. There's two examples of regional wave models that we have at NHC where we hindcast historical storms and look at the spatial variability. It's notable that offshore in deeper water, you can see storms that are, or you can see wave heights off the coast of Qualicum Beach that are 3 meters and greater. So, excuse me. So those are very large waves that can happen in this area. Now, just getting towards the end here, I was going to show some pictures and just at a very high level. I'd like everyone who's on the call to sort of play along and just look at the picture for a second or two and think, what is the shoreline telling you? And have that thought in your head when you look at this photo. And then I'll just share what I see when I see this photo. And so I'll say with this photo, I'm seeing some really, really fine sand. And I'm seeing lots of vegetation right up at the top of the beach. There's some logs in the distance. Those logs would have been lifted up on some high water events, so this area floods. But that really fine sand is telling me that this is a depositional area, so sediments are being deposited in this area. as opposed to being eroded, either deposited or there's no erosional tendency in this area because of the fine sands that are being maintained. Interestingly, this photo that you're seeing is just about 100 meters away from the last photo. These photos are on Quadra Island, by the way. And what I see in this photo is erosion happening. So just a short distance away from where there's accumulation happening, here's erosion going on. There's a tree whose roots are being exposed. There's a bit of a midden that's starting to become exposed. And so the coastal processes have changed. Relatively short distance away, we've gone from something where there's no concerns about erosion to there's erosion happening. And so there's a change. Something the physics of the situation have changed in that short distance. This is a neat picture. There's a lot going on in this picture. This is a picture from near Qualicum Beach. What you're seeing is there's evidence of erosion. If you look up towards the left, the bank's falling down. There's a big chunk of sod that's just recently fallen down. If you look on the beach between the rocks, you don't see any fine sand. It's all cobble. Anything that's finer has been washed away. So those are clues that tell you that this is a pretty high energy area. Some of those big boulders that you see lying on the beach would have been in the slope originally and have fallen out of the slope as erosion has occurred. And so this is an area that's exposed to high energy and has active erosion going on. This picture is a very artificial slope. Revetment was built many years ago. If you look right at the bottom of the picture, though, you see a lot of large rocks, and those large rocks were not there originally. They were at one point part of that engineered slope. The rocks in that slope are too small, and the design of that slope of that revetment was not done properly, and nor was it constructed very well. And as a result, a significant amount of material that was at one point part of that shoreline revetment protecting the shoreline is now lying on the beach. So that's a structure that's in the process of slowly failing. Again, lots of evidence of very high energy. And here's a picture from Qualicum Beach. There's a seawall on the right, and on the left there's some lower rock armor and revetment. And what you can see, it's maybe a little hard. It'll be easier tomorrow on the beach walk. I mean, the first thing that strikes me is how low the beach is in front of the seawall and the fact that the foundation of the seawall has been exposed. When that seawall was originally constructed, when they would have designed it, they would have put a ramp to come down from the lawn and tied that into the existing beach. So the beach is 2 to 3 feet lower than it would have been when they built this wall, because no engineer would design a seawall where the foundation is exposed like that. And the foundation of that seawall is becoming exposed. It's evidence that the beach is being eroded in this area and is not able to accrete sediment. So that was my very quick talk, and I will stop sharing and pass it back to DG.
Okay, thanks, Grant, very much. And I will share my screen again. There we go. Okay, so I guess we've done that. Thank you very much. And we'll have time at the end for questions for both of us. I think Grant's really covered really well the coastal processes, and you know, I love the reading, you know, what does this picture tell you? That's really great. And so now I'm going to touch on very briefly about the habitat, and heading back, if you recall those 4 guiding principles. The first one is about the coastal processes that Green Shores, you want to restore or preserve the coastal processes. The second one is about restoring or preserving habitat. So one of the things that many people are not familiar with is that there is on marine shorelines a riparian zone as well. Most people think of riparian areas as within freshwater systems along streams, for example, familiar with the riparian area regulation. But marine shorelines also have a riparian area, and it's very vital. You can see in this graphic the types of functions that a riparian area does. A healthy riparian area, it really helps with soil stability, water quality, pollution abatement, and naturally it also includes wildlife habitat. In Green Shores, we not only consider from the natural boundary, or that is to say the highest high water mark, upland as part of the riparian, but also that interface between the land and water. So looking at the beach wreck, for example, and the area that we want just below below the high tide mark. So that all provides really important ecological functions, and that all contributes to nearshore productivity. One of the things that I know I was originally surprised about was how important the riparian zone is as a food source for juvenile salmon. The graph on the right is taken from Washington State, but if you can look at the green bar here, this is the food sources from terrestrial riparian to juvenile salmon. So it's about 50%. So that means that those salmon are directly feeding on what falls off of trees, for example, and bushes into the water. And so it's very, very important food source for young salmon. So needless to say, if you don't have those trees and shrubs there, those salmon aren't going to have as much to eat. We also know there's other types of organisms that use those shoreline areas, such as herring spawn, and I know that's a really important part of the BC coast, and we need a healthy shoreline for that. And of course, the forage fish. It's having a healthy beach environment and keeping that sediment supply there for sand lance, for example, and other forage fish to spawn on is really vital. So it all adds up that functioning marine shorelines are really vital to our most iconic species. And when we look at the flow, insects, woody debris, vegetation, they may not seem to be important in what we do in that, right along the shore. However, there's a direct link up the food chain to our species, such as orcas, seals, sea lions, shorebirds, etc. So what we need to do is think about what we do on the shore and how that supports that food chain for those iconic species that we all love to see. So how does Green Shores help? And what is Green Shores for Homes? So basically, Green Shores for Homes is applicable to residential properties, freshwater lake, as well as marine shorelines. It's intended to encourage incremental improvements. Remember that slide I showed of that property with hard armor right across the entire property. And hard armor does impede the flow of coastal processes. And so removing that at an incremental way really helps. So that, for example, on that property, what happened was they removed about 80% of that armor and got credit for doing so. So incremental improvements is a big part of Green Shores for Homes. And it's based on those 4 guiding principles. So another couple of shots of before and after, using nature-based approaches, and another one closer to home on Vancouver Island, before and after. So these are designs that are utilizing the Green Shores 4 guiding principles to guide design. And this one project here is a Green Shores level 1 rated project. So what are the credits all about? So if you recall those 4 guiding principles, category 1's pretty straightforward. It's for shoreline processes. And basically you can think of the credits are descriptions of best options for best management practices. So BMPs. And so there's 6 credits for shoreline processes. There are 6 credits for shoreline habitats. There's another 6 for water quality. And finally, there's 4 credits for shoreline stewardship. So I don't have time in this webinar to go over the specifics of every single one of these credits. We normally take a full day to do a Green Shores introduction to Green Shores workshop, so we can't possibly cover it in an hour. But I'd just like to give you an example of, this is the Green Shores for Homes credit 1.2. This is where we're trying to encourage greater setback so that we're avoiding impact. And you can see here that if you just meet the regulatory setback with no variance, you can get 2 points versus, well, actually I'm thinking that's, oh, sorry, 3 points. And versus if you meet a 75-year setback plus sea level rise, you get 10 points. So it incentivizes sort of a broader application of that best management practice. And plus in this credit, you can get some bonus points. So that just gives you an example so that it's quite specific. So that way you can verify whether or not the practice has been implemented or not. So it's verifiable. So there's 2 pilot ratings levels for Green Shores for Homes. We call it Green Shores for Homes 1 or Chinook. And you need to get a total of 20 to 39 points from the various credits. And you need to have a minimum of 10 points from shoreline processes and shoreline habitat. And so this way, we really emphasize the processes and habitat aspects. So in other words, you couldn't get all your points from the shore stewardship or water quality. You need to have the shoreline processes and habitats in there. The second level is Green Shores for Homes level 2 or Orca. And you need 40 or more points. And again, you need a minimum of 50% from shoreline processes and shoreline habitat. I'm pleased to say just last week, we had our second Green Shores for Homes Orca rated project finalized. So, and both of them are on Vancouver Island. That's really exciting. So how do we use the guidance material that has been developed? Basically, the ideal is to enroll and initiate a Green Shores for Homes project. And you want to do that before the project is designed. So that way you can utilize the design guidance to tweak your design to maximize the number of credits. So once you've enrolled your project, we send you the guide and then a template to record all the documentation that's required. So in stage 2 is, as I mentioned, you're going to tweak your project design to maximize credits. You're going to construct your project and you're going to take photographs as you go and collect all that documentation. And when the project is finished, then you submit that information to a verifier, of which the Stewardship Centre assigns. And then the final stage is where the verifier reviews the project documentation, provides a rating, and then if the project meets the standard, then the project proponent receives the Green Shores award. I did want to talk a little bit more about, a lot of times we get a question about why do we want to have a project certified? And basically, it's really important that the project gets, it has a rigorous third-party verification process. So basically, there's compelling proof that the project has achieved the environmental goals that's set out. So it's this third-party verification is one of the things that sets Green Shores apart. And it is in, the Green Shores standard is in alignment with more and more government policies and regulations. There are quite a number of different local governments that refer to Green Shores because it's specific and it helps provide guidance as to what it is that we want to see. And then finally, it can be linked to incentives in the future, and I will speak to some incentives that we're just about to offer a pilot project. So here on the photograph on the left is our the Green Shores for Homes verifier. She's on the right-hand side, congratulating the homeowners there in down outside of Nanaimo. So let me tell you a little bit about the Green Shores for Homes Incentives pilot study. One of the things that we are recognizing is that coastal studies are expensive, and that we also want to encourage collaboration. So we've partnered with the Real Estate Foundation, BC, Pacific Salmon Foundation, and 2 pilot communities, one of which is the town of Qualicum Beach, the other is the Comox Valley Regional District, to undertake neighborhood scale coastal studies. So these studies will be completed, and in those neighborhoods, we are also offering free Green Shores for Home site assessments. You can see Kelly over there on the left-hand side. Kelly Locke is our Green Shores projects coordinator, and she'll be doing Green Shores for Homes assessments. We'll also be offering educational workshops and also free Green Shores for Homes project enrollment and verification. So the idea here is that we have neighborhood scale coastal studies that are offered to folks that would like to implement Green Shores for Homes, and we'll provide support through the site assessments, so identify what credits might be available for a particular project, and just to provide a bit of support there. And then for those folks who decide to enroll their project, we offer the free enrollment and verification. So the idea is to ultimately have the happy folks like you see on the right-hand side. These are the first ever Green Shores for Homes project that was certified. And that is not too far from where you are in, I want to say, Qualicum Bay. So in closing, talk a little bit about, just briefly, the beach walkabout is going to be happening tomorrow. Just a note that it is full. We are very conscious that we need to have a small group, so please only registered participants. It's rain or shine. Looks like we're going to have some good weather for tomorrow, and obviously dress for the weather and bring sunscreen. So you should be getting, if you haven't gotten already, for those who are registered, an email with full details about the walkabout. So I'd like to just close with saying thank you very much to Grant for joining us on the webinar and sharing his expertise with the about coastal engineering, and also would like to make a point about thanking all of the funders who provide funding for Green Shores, and you can see it's quite a range of funders, and the Pacific Salmon Foundation has just joined us, so I haven't quite gotten their logo up there yet, but will be added on the next time we're doing that. So I think we have some time for about 10 minutes or so for questions. Anna, if you want to join us again and read out some of the questions, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you so much for your presentations. This was really interesting, and I find it was good to see sort of a perspective of Grant as a coastal engineer on the Green Shore application. And I liked all the examples with pictures. That was great. I have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask right away. And one of them is sort of what is required from a property owner to qualify from Green Shores for Home project? What are the major requirements?
So I'll answer that one. Great question. So basically, Green Shores for homes or Green Shores for shoreline development, both credit and rating systems, are really used when there's, I'll see it as the opportunity. The opportunity is when the property owner or manager recognizes they want to do a shoreline project. And so the project proponent would then say, okay, how are we going to design this project? And if they can utilize the design guidance from Green Shores, that will help guide the kind of project that they do. So in other words, the project proponent is going to do a project anyway. How are they going to move forward? And so they would, the homeowner would cover the project costs for whatever solution they choose. And what Green Shores can offer through this pilot study is we can offer in the neighborhood, the target neighborhood, which happens to be the Higgs and Crescent area and Qualicum Beach. We can offer the coastal study, access to the coastal study, and the free Green Shores for Homes assessment, as well as a free enrollment and verification. But the project, just to be clear, the project cost, the physical cost of constructing the project is covered by the property owner.
Excellent, thank you. So if someone was to get an assessment, wanting to get an assessment, where do they go? Do they contact you directly, or what's the procedure?
Yeah, that's a great question. They can get in touch with me directly, and I can put them in touch with Kelly, who will do the Green Shores for Homes assessment. And to be clear, when I say project construction, that means the design and construction costs. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. And so once the Green Shores project is completed, is there a follow-up sort of survey of the site? Is there any maintenance that's included in the Green Shores sort of project design, or is it something extra that has to be done?
Yeah, and that really depends on the project site, but basically Green Shores does when the project is complete, and it is rated when the project is complete. A lot of times, depending on what the project is about, there could be a requirement for monitoring, and that is something that the project proponent covers the cost on that. And we are working on developing a mechanism for more long-term monitoring to come back to the site, probably, annually or every 3 to 5 years, but we don't have that at present. It's basically when the project is complete, and then we rate it at that time.
Excellent, okay, great. And we have a question that is specific to Hickson proposal. This raised pocket beach will be protected by 3 headland structures, 2 perpendicular to the shoreline and 1 large breakwater center 20 meters offshore. What effects will this large head structure have on the lateral transport of sediments along the foreshore within a couple of 100 years? In other words, might this cause erosion in front of the nearby properties?
You want me to address that, DG? Sure.
Yes, please. You're the
It's a really
engineer.
good question. And I'll just start by saying, you know, in the design process, we were very concerned about that. We didn't want anything to do with this project to have a deleterious effect on the neighboring properties. You know, within the Green Shores principles and the overall principles, you certainly don't want to create a structure that's going to have a negative impact. So we looked carefully at that in the design process, and we pulled the little rock structures on the end. We pulled them away from the shoreline a distance, and what's expected, what our modeling suggests is going to happen is that some of that sediment that's put in there is going to essentially leak out either side, and that's by design. And there's a pathway in which the sediment is going to build up on one side, depending on the given storm, and then move back again. There's also the sizing and the location of the sort of the central, I think the term was centered breakwater, as the question asked, has been positioned to ensure that there's a percentage of sediment that will be allowed during storms to bypass the entire structure. So during storms, if there's a big storm coming from the north, sediment's going to get driven up against the north side of it, but at the same time, the spacing of those rock structures has been very carefully done to allow some overwash to occur, and sediments will actually get washed out the opposite side. So there's going to be there's an allowance for a through pass of sediments, and the beach itself in that area is going to be dynamically stable. That beach was designed to serve a couple of functions. First and foremost, it's trying to provide wave protection, you know, reduce the wave run up on the property, and to be an alternative to building a seawall. It provides habitat, both the soft sediments as well as the rock clusters. The rock clusters provide habitat for attachment habitat for seaweeds and shading, and they also at high water provide a refuge for juvenile fish. There's potential for surf smelt habitat that's been lost. It's trying to replace some of the lost beach that was there, that has been lost due to the structures that are there, and build it back up again. But really, yeah, we've been quite concerned about the project potentially having erosion on the neighboring properties, and a lot of design effort went into addressing that.
That is great to know. Thank you.
And I'll just add a little bit to that, and just a couple of points is one of the things that we hear a lot about at Green Shores is what I call the end of the wall syndrome, which is when there's a seawall that's put in, and then you get erosion at either end, and that just sort of then makes the next property owner put in a seawall, and the next and the next. And then ultimately, and Grant, you can tweak my explanation here. I'm a biologist, not an engineer, but basically that hardening can ultimately lead to a lowering of the beach. And we often show in our Green Shores Level 1 training a location in Victoria where they, lost a lot of beach, and all the sediment basically got washed away because of the hardened wall. They went in and they nourished the beach, and basically because it was designed carefully, it basically, the sediment moves from side to side, but it does stay in that bay. And Grant, I'm just blanking on the name of the beach of the bay. It's there by it's in Victoria by the cemetery.
Ross Bay.
Thank you, Ross Bay. Yes, and that was one of the first Green Shores type projects, from my knowledge, here on Vancouver Island. So it it can work, but you do have to do the studies to make sure that you understand what's going on and design it appropriately. So.
Excellent, that's good, DG, thank you. We have a couple more questions left, and we'll address them hopefully pretty quick here, but one of them is related to the previous question, and it is there any risks to being a green shore revetment adjacent to vertical concrete seawalls, and if so, what are any recommendations? And I guess we touched on it a little bit, but maybe if you can outline a few recommendations, that would be helpful.
Yeah, Grant, would you be able to speak to that first?
Sure. I'm just reading the question again, and is there a risk of a green shore revetment adjacent to a vertical concrete seawall? Yeah, a vertical seawall certainly reflects a lot of wave energy, and if the waves are coming in at any sort of oblique angle, it can really focus waves down, as DG was saying, those end effects. If you were going to try and design a green shores project next door to a vertical concrete seawall, it would be very challenging to achieve good project success if the properties were quite narrow or small. So yes, there's a very large risk to that, and really that speaks to a need to work with the neighbors and come up the more, if you can get 3, 4, 5 properties together, you know, your project success can increase a lot. It's very hard to do on a single property if both your neighbors were to have seawalls, for example.
And I'll add to that, if remember about tying in, and if it's a very, very narrow, I would agree, but remember when I mentioned about the incremental aspect, so tying into, you can have a Green Shores type project on one property, and then you tie in with some hard armor. So that first project that I showed, as I said, I think they removed about 80% of their seawall, and then they tied in with, I think they used naturalized stone rather than a concrete wall in that aspect. So they depending on your situation, it can be. And I also want to point out that there are, I mean, we're talking about armoring and different types of soft protection, but Green Shores is not just about soft protection. It's also about native plant habitat, planting those plants so that they can also help, having a robust riparian area can help attenuate any waves that overtop whatever structure you have there. So I always like to remind people it's not just about nature-based protection. It also is about what kind of practices you do upland, that removing pollution from entering the aquatic environment, for example. So we want low impact development approaches, minimizing your impervious surfaces, for example, making sure sediment supplies gets to your beach, that sort of thing. So you can do a lot with Green Shores no matter what kind of property you have.
Great, thank you so much. We have a few more questions, and I'll ask you if that would be okay if we answer them via email. DG and Grant, how does that sound to you?
Sure. Do you want to just do one more, and then we'll do the rest?
Yes,
I've got a little bit of time if you want to keep going.
Okay, yeah. Sure. If people are, we still have everybody hanging in. Yeah, let's see what we got.
Sure. The next question is there any cooperation from provincial and federal authorities on existing developed properties that don't have enough horizontal space to accommodate a Green Shores revetment on property, encroachment into the foreshore?
So is there support from different levels of government? Well, different levels of government from the federal, the provincial and federal, obviously you do need to get your permitting no matter what type of approach you take. But as I said previously, generally, if you're undertaking a project that utilizes the Green Shores principles, that is in alignment with provincial and federal regulatory framework. So your chances of going through that permitting process with ease is increased. But there's no specific Green Shores special permit, for example, yet. I do note that in the U.S. they have, the Army Corps of Engineers has a living shorelines general permit, and I would love to see something like that here in Canada, but we're not there yet. The Stewardship Centre is working with the BC Ministry of Forest Lands and Natural Resource Operations and Rural Development, the folks with the Land Tenure Branch, to discuss a special fast track permitting, but that's very much in process at this time.
Great, thank you, DG. And I see that Grant answered the next question on chat. So I think that's all what we have for today for questions. I thank our presenters again for giving us such good talks, and I encourage everyone to follow up on our website and look for the recording of this webinar. Again, it will be posted on Stewardship Centre for BC, social media, as well as the main Green Shores web. Okay?
Great.
Thank you,
thanks, everybody. Okay, bye.